He dropped the radio. Didn't throw it, didn't set it down. Just opened his hand and let it fall into the dirt. And then he ran. Not walked. Not drifted off. Ran. Full speed, without a word, without a glance back at the 11 people standing behind him. Without any warning that anyone would ever agree made sense. He ran directly toward the edge of a cliff, and he went over it. Multiple witnesses. Broad daylight. Open terrain. And no one has seen Terrence Woods since that moment on October 5th, 2018. For a person to vanish into that terrain the way the witnesses described, straight down into that gradient of rock and brush and pine, they would have had to move at a pace that trained search dogs could track easily. The dogs were brought in the following morning. They followed the scent as far as the road at the base of the cliff, and then the trail went cold. Not faint, cold, as if the earth had simply absorbed him. 7 days of searching. Helicopters, ATVs, ground teams, dog units from multiple counties. And in the end, the Idaho County Sheriff's Office published a statement that contained 4 words that should disturb anyone paying attention. No signs were located. Not, he evaded. Not, he survived. Not, he was found. No signs of any kind. In 4 million acres of wilderness. This story has been told before, but there is something in the sequence of events on the morning of October 5th, something that happened before Terrence reached that cliff, that changes the entire shape of what we are looking at. Something that his family has been pointing to for years, and that almost no one has examined with the attention it deserves. We are going to examine it tonight. All of it. Terrence Shamel Woods Jr. was born on October the 24th, 1991, in Capitol Heights, Maryland. He was the kind of young man who planned things, who prepared. His sister Sharnia described him as someone you called when you needed to think something through. Methodical, she said. Careful. The kind of person who triple-checked departure times and packed his bag 2 days before a flight. He had graduated from the University of Maryland in 2013, then crossed an ocean. He spent 5 years in London, earning a double master's degree at the American International University, and quietly built a career in television that most people his age would have envied. He worked on ITV's The Voice UK, on the BBC documentary Saving Africa's Elephants. He traveled the world with a camera crew and came home with footage and stories and a growing list of credits. He was 27 years old and everything was still in front of him. In 2018, he returned to the United States and moved back into his father's home in Maryland. Not out of failure, out of transition. He had recently signed a contract as a production assistant with Raw TV, a prolific London-based company best known for the Discovery Channel series Gold Rush. The assignment: travel to rural Idaho and help document a spin-off show about an abandoned gold mine called Penman Mine. 6 weeks in the American backcountry. Good money, good credit. Another notch in a resume that was only getting stronger. On September 30th, 2018, his father drove him to Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. They said goodbye at the curb. Terrence Sr. watched his son walk through the sliding glass doors with his bag. That was the last time he would see him in person. The flight took Terrence to Missoula, Montana, where he joined the rest of the Raw TV crew. A 12-person team. He was the only black member. Over the first few days, he texted home, sent pictures of the scenery, told his father everything was fine. On October 4th, he checked in from the hotel in Idaho. Just before midnight local time, he called his dad. They talked. That was the last physical phone call I had with him, Terrence Sr. told NBC's Dateline. Now let's talk about where they were filming. Because the terrain of Oro Grande, Idaho, is not a backdrop. It is an argument. The Nez Perce-Clearwater National Forest covers approximately 4 million acres of northern Idaho. Idaho County itself spans over 8,500 square miles, larger than the state of New Jersey, and more than 80% of that land is federally managed wilderness. But those numbers don't tell you what it feels like to stand in it. The Oro Grande area sits at roughly 6,000 feet of elevation. The terrain does not level out. It is what the sheriff would later describe to reporters with a simplicity that stays with you. Everything is up or down. There's no level. A landscape of near vertical drops, dense conifer brush, abandoned mine shafts from the gold rush era, and predators, cougars, bears, wolves, that move through the dark without a sound. This is where Terrence Woods went to work. The morning of October 5th began without incident. The crew drove out to the Penman mine location. They set up equipment. They filmed. And somewhere in those hours, something shifted. Something that the official account of the day doesn't fully explain. That morning, Terrence sent his father a text. It was brief. He told him he would be coming home early, October 10th, nearly 5 weeks ahead of schedule. He didn't explain why in that message. In a separate email to Raw TV, cited concern for his mother's health. But there was something else happening on set that morning. Something that would not be mentioned in any official press release. Something that only surfaced when investigators played back the 911 call. The call was logged at 6:41 in the evening on October 5th. A crew member reporting Terrence missing. The transcript reads, "Terrence has been having a really hard time emotionally and had a mental breakdown earlier today." But Terrence's family disputed this characterization completely. His sister Sharnia told reporters he had no history of mental illness. His colleagues who knew him from London described him as bubbly, passionate, methodical. And yet, there was a second detail in that 911 call that Terrence's father later shared, publicly. A detail that, once you hear it, doesn't let go. According to a crew member's statement, earlier that morning, before the cameras rolled, before anyone approached the cliff edge, they said they had to detain him. Let that sit for a moment. A film crew saying they physically detained a 27-year-old man on a remote mountain, hours before he vanished. Raw TV later offered a different account, that what happened that morning was a standard debrief about local wildlife. Those two versions cannot both be true. And neither version explains what Terrence did at approximately 5:30 in the afternoon. The shoot was winding down for the day. Equipment was being packed. People were talking, moving. Terrence walked toward a woman who handled transportation for the crew. He told her he needed to use the restroom. He walked a few paces away from her. He opened his hand and let the radio fall into the dirt. And then he ran. The supervisor, Simon G., described watching Terrence moving down the cliff like a hare. Full speed, no hesitation, heading directly into the forest below. Several crew members tried to follow. They got cuts, they got bruises. The terrain, that straight down drop the sheriff described, was too dangerous to descend at speed. They turned back. And Terrence kept going. There is something worth pausing on here. The 911 call transcript described Terrence as someone who had never been in the woods before, a person with no wilderness experience, no survival training. And yet he descended a near vertical cliff face, a gradient that experienced crew members found too dangerous to follow, at a run in failing light without stopping. He made it to the road at the base, alive, upright, still moving. What does a person have to be feeling? What kind of force has to be driving them to run down a cliff like that without a single moment of hesitation? That question has no comfortable answer. By the time the Idaho County Sheriff's Office received the call at 6:41 p.m., the October sky over Oro Grande was already bruising toward dark. At 6,000 feet in a northern Idaho October, darkness does not settle gently. It arrives like a curtain being dropped. Temperature drops with it. Visibility collapses. And Terrence was out there in cargo pants and a sweatshirt. No pack, no phone, no supplies. His radio was still lying in the dirt where he had dropped it. Due to the late hour of the report, the official search did not begin until sunrise the following morning. That meant Terrence was alone in that forest for an entire night before a single search team entered the trees. 11 hours of darkness, in a landscape where the sheriff's department would later note the presence of cougars, bears, wolves, and collapsed mine shafts deep enough to swallow a person without a sound. There was one more thing about that night. When search coordinators called 2 Bear Air, the aerial rescue service, to request an immediate overhead sweep, they were told the helicopter was out of service, under maintenance. So on the night Terrence went over that cliff, there was no bird in the air, no thermal imaging scanning the canopy, no way to read 4 million acres of darkness from above. Just 11 people at a motel, and one man somewhere in the dark below the ridge. The search began at first light on October 6th. 3 dog teams from Clearwater County, ground searchers on foot, U.S. Forest Service personnel, Idaho Fish and Game agents who stayed into the night, checking with hunters and extending the perimeter outward. By day 2, a backcountry rescue helicopter from Clearwater County joined the aerial effort. ATVs carved through the brush. For 7 consecutive days, this machinery of search turned over every accessible acre within an expanding radius of the cliff edge. And here's what they found. Nothing. No clothing. No personal effects. No physical evidence of any kind. The Idaho State Police Lab can test material for DNA identification. There has never been anything to test. The dogs had tracked Terrence's scent down the cliff face and to the road at the base of the drop. That is where the trail ended. Not faded. Not diverted. The dogs stopped. At the road, as if Terrence had stepped off the earth at the asphalt's edge. These were trained tracking animals. Animals that can follow a human scent trail through rain, through running water, through days of weather degradation. On a dry October morning with a fresh trail less than 12 hours old, they followed him to the road, and that was the end. The sheriff acknowledged this directly. His teams could not determine whether Terrence had gone left, right, or gotten into a vehicle. But there was something else working against them. Rain had moved in and was actively erasing the ground. The sheriff's office noted it formally in their logs. In Idaho County October, rain arrives without negotiation. Whatever physical evidence might have been waiting at that roadside, footprints, disturbed gravel, anything, the weather was dissolving it hour by hour. On October 9th, 4 days after the disappearance, Terrence's parents flew to Idaho. Most of the Raw TV crew had already left town. Raw TV told Dateline that all crew members remained until the official search was called off before relocating to their next production. The official search was called off on October 12th. Terrence's father met with the former sheriff. He asked about the phone Terrence had left in his hotel room, the laptop, the hotel room itself. Had anyone examined them? Terrence Sr. later told reporters he believed critical evidence had never been properly gathered. The FBI was never called in. The Idaho County Sheriff's Office confirmed to investigators that no federal assistance had been requested. The last thing Terrence posted to social media was a photograph. A forest of fir trees, dense, with a river just visible in the distance. He captioned it with one word: Idaho. Posted to his private Instagram account. No context, no tag. Just a photograph of trees and a name for the place that would take him. There are several explanations for what happened to Terrence Woods. They all have problems. Let's walk through them, honestly. The first is the one the sheriff's office settled on, at least publicly. A person in psychological distress ran into the wilderness, became disoriented, and did not survive the exposure. Idaho County has been called one of the worst places in the state to go missing. The Idaho Missing Persons Clearinghouse manager said exactly that. The terrain is unforgiving. The predators are real. A person in a sweatshirt at 6,000 feet on an October night, that is not a survivable combination for very long. This explanation is rational, but it collides with one stubborn fact. 7 days of comprehensive searching produced nothing. No clothing, no trace, no physical evidence of any kind. As of today, his case remains open on the NamUs database, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Entry number MP52962. Open. Unresolved. The second theory belongs to Terrence's family, and it is not a fringe theory. It is not born from grief distorting judgment. It is built on a series of documented facts that deserve to be taken seriously. Terrence Sr. told reporters, "I think my son saw something, heard something, and didn't want to be a part of it. And when he created the story that he had to leave, that wasn't going to be possible." Consider what we know. Terrence texted his father early that morning, saying he was coming home early, before whatever happened on set had escalated. He emailed Raw TV with a formal request to be released from the shoot. There were reported tensions between him and the production supervisor from the moment they met. Tensions that the Idaho County Sheriff himself acknowledged, describing an environment where, in his words, he wasn't happy there, and there were several people who weren't happy with him. And then there is what Terrence's supervisor said to his father on the phone. Within days of the disappearance, Simon G. called Terrence Sr. to report what had happened. The first thing out of his mouth was not an expression of concern. It was a critique of his son's job performance. Terrence's sister put it plainly. He wouldn't run away without good reason unless he was scared. What this theory doesn't answer, and what no theory answers, is where he went after the road. If someone helped him leave. If he made contact with someone outside the crew. If he disappeared into a new life, or into something far worse. The sheriff's office explored the possibility that he arranged for a vehicle. It led to a dead end. They checked nearby houses. No one had seen him. No one had heard a knock on the door in the night. There is a third thing that deserves to be said, even though it is uncomfortable. Terrence Woods was a young black man who went missing in a remote area of northern Idaho. The FBI was never called. His hotel room and personal devices were reportedly not fully examined as evidence. His family cannot even access the complete police report because the case has not been formally closed, and open cases in Idaho block report release. Open cases prevent answers. Closed cases produce them. This one remains suspended between both states. Neither resolved nor actively investigated. Just open. Waiting. And then there is the detail from that morning, the one we keep returning to, the one buried in the 911 call transcript. The claim that before the cameras rolled on that final day, something happened serious enough that a crew member used the word detained to a 911 dispatcher. That word, if it is accurate, it transforms the entire shape of what we are looking at. Because it means the question is not only where did Terrence go, it is what was Terrence running from. Today, the road at the base of that cliff in Ora Grande is the same road it has always been. The Penman mine is still up there above the tree line, rusting quietly as it has for a century. Hunters pass through the Nez Perce-Clearwater National Forest each autumn, exactly as they did in October 2018. The forest doesn't carry scars. It doesn't mark the places where people have entered and not returned. It simply continues, indifferent, immense, the same 4 million acres it has always been. Terrence would have turned 34 years old this past October. His father is still fighting for answers, still calling, still asking the same questions into the same silence. Can you show me the hotel footage? Can you tell me what was on his phone? Can you tell me what happened to my son on that mountain? The wilderness of northern Idaho does not answer questions. It never has. People walk into it and walk out, and a few, a quiet, terrible few, simply stop somewhere in the middle of that transition and are never accounted for. Some of them leave behind footprints that go cold at a roadside. Some leave behind a single photograph of fir trees and a river. One word written beneath it. Idaho. What Terrence saw. What he heard. What made him open his hand and let that radio fall. What drove him to the edge of that cliff and over it at full speed in the eye-fading light. The forest knows. The forest kept him. And the forest, as always, is not talking. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Terrence Shamel Woods Jr., contact the Idaho County Sheriff's Office. His case remains open. His family is still waiting. Terrence dropped his radio and ran toward the void, as if something had called to him from the other side of that cliff, something the rest of the crew simply couldn't hear. But what happens when the person who vanishes isn't someone unfamiliar with the wilderness? What happens when the one who disappears is someone who has spent a lifetime reading terrain, reading danger, reading every language the wild has to offer? Someone who carries weapons, someone trained to survive exactly this kind of environment. There is a case, and it is one of the most unsettling we have ever covered on this series, where a decorated military veteran, a man with every tool and every instinct to walk out of any wilderness alive, simply vanished. No distress call, no trace, no explanation. When the apex predator becomes the one who disappears, the weapon's useless, the training irrelevant, the expertise worth nothing, the rules of the wilderness stop making sense entirely. That story is next.